There is a quiet kind of person the world rarely understands. Not the loud rebels, not the dramatic loners in movies, but the ones who simply drift away from the noise, the ones who sit in a corner of a crowded room and feel more comfortable with their own thoughts than with the voices around them. And if you are one of them, you probably know the strange feeling of being misunderstood. People assume you're shy, or arrogant, or broken in some invisible way. They ask questions like, "Why are you always alone?" as if solitude is a problem that needs fixing. But what most people fail to see is that the preference for solitude is rarely about hating people. It's about something deeper, something quieter, something the world moves too fast to notice. Because people who enjoy being alone often carry an inner landscape that is incredibly rich and incredibly complex. Their mind is not empty when they sit alone. It's alive with reflections, memories, questions, and quiet observations about the world. In psychology, there is a subtle difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness feels like an empty well, a painful absence of connection. But solitude is different. Solitude is a chosen space, a place where the mind breathes, and many people who prefer being alone didn't randomly develop this trait. It was shaped, slowly, by experience. Often, it begins much earlier than anyone realizes. Think about a child who learns very early that their emotions are too complicated for the people around them. Maybe their feelings were dismissed with phrases like, "You're overreacting," or "Stop being so sensitive." Over time, that child begins to understand something silently. Their inner world isn't always welcome in the outside one. So they adapt, not by becoming louder, but by becoming deeper. Instead of expressing everything outwardly, they turn inward. They build a private world of thoughts and interpretations, a place where their feelings are safe from judgment. Psychologists sometimes call this a quiet form of emotional adaptation. Not dramatic trauma, but something smaller and more invisible. Micro-experiences. Moments where someone felt misunderstood, ignored, or emotionally alone even while surrounded by people. And these moments slowly shape the mind like water shaping stone. Over time, the brain begins to associate silence with safety. In solitude, there is no pressure to perform, no need to explain yourself, no invisible expectations hanging in the air, just space. And that space allows something powerful to develop, self-awareness. Many people who enjoy being alone have an unusually active inner dialogue. They constantly analyze their own thoughts, their reactions, their memories. While others seek stimulation from the outside world, these individuals find it within. Their mind becomes a kind of observatory. They watch people closely. They notice subtle shifts in tone, body language, emotional undercurrents. They often understand the moods of others before a single word is spoken. This is why solitude often produces deep thinkers, writers, artists, philosophers. But there's also another layer to this story that most people overlook. For some, solitude becomes a protective wall, not a prison, but a boundary. Because once you become highly aware of emotional dynamics, you also start noticing something uncomfortable about human interaction, the hidden tensions, the performative conversations, the subtle competition for attention, validation, and status. And when you see these patterns clearly, constant socializing can start to feel exhausting. It's like hearing noise that others don't notice. Imagine walking into a crowded room and instantly sensing the unspoken emotions floating through it: insecurity, comparison, forced laughter, silent judgments. For someone with high emotional sensitivity, this environment can drain energy incredibly fast. So they step back, not because they dislike people, but because their nervous system simply needs quieter environments to recover. Psychologists sometimes link this to heightened emotional processing. Some minds absorb more information from social environments than others. Every conversation, every tone shift, every subtle emotional signal gets processed deeply. That subtle emotional signal gets processed deeply. And when the brain is constantly processing that much information, solitude becomes something essential, a reset, a place where the noise finally stops. But here is where things become even more interesting. People who enjoy being alone often develop another surprising trait. They become extremely independent thinkers. When you spend long periods in your own mental space, you naturally begin forming your own perspectives about life. Your identity isn't built entirely from social approval trends or group consensus. Instead, it grows from reflection. You ask questions many people avoid. Why do people behave the way they do? Why do certain relationships feel draining while others feel peaceful? Why do we chase things that don't actually make us happy? This kind of introspection slowly separates a person from the mental crowd. While others may unconsciously follow social scripts, solitary thinkers often pause and question those scripts entirely, and that can make them appear unusual to others. Because they don't always react the way people expect, they're less interested in superficial conversations, less motivated by social competition, less attached to constant validation. Instead, they often search for something deeper: meaning, authenticity, truth. But this trait also comes with a hidden emotional cost, because when you see the world differently, it can sometimes feel like standing behind an invisible wall. You're present, you're observing, but you rarely feel fully understood. Many people who enjoy solitude know this feeling well. They can laugh with others, they can participate in conversations, but a part of them always remains slightly distant, watching, analyzing, reflecting. And sometimes this distance isn't just personality. Sometimes it's the echo of past emotional experiences. Moments when connection didn't feel safe. Moments when vulnerability was met with misunderstanding. The mind remembers these moments even when we don't consciously think about them. It learns patterns, and eventually it begins to believe something subtle but powerful. Solitude is safer than disappointment. So instead of chasing connection endlessly, these individuals become selective. They prefer a few meaningful relationships rather than many shallow ones, and if those meaningful connections aren't present, they are surprisingly comfortable being alone, because their mind has already built something most people never develop: an inner companion, a rich internal world where thoughts flow freely without judgment, where ideas grow quietly in the background, where emotions can be processed slowly instead of rushed. But this inner world can also become so comfortable that stepping outside of it begins to feel difficult, not impossible, just unfamiliar. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the very traits that make solitary people thoughtful, perceptive, and emotionally aware can sometimes slowly transform into something else, something subtle, something almost invisible at first. The line between healthy solitude and emotional isolation. And the truth is, many people don't realize they've crossed that line until much later, because emotional isolation rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives quietly, like a room slowly losing its light. At first, solitude feels peaceful. The silence is comforting. The mind feels clear without constant social noise. But over time, if connection becomes too rare, something subtle begins to shift inside the human psyche. Humans, even the most introspective ones, are still wired for connection, not crowds, not endless conversation, but real connection, the kind where someone understands your thoughts without you needing to explain every layer of them. The kind where silence between two people doesn't feel awkward, it feels safe. When that kind of connection is missing for too long, the mind sometimes begins building stronger walls around itself. The person who once chose solitude for clarity may slowly start choosing it out of habit, then out of comfort, and eventually out of fear. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of emotional exhaustion, fear that opening up will once again lead to disappointment. So the world becomes smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. Conversations remain surface level. Feelings remain private. Vulnerability becomes something carefully guarded, like a fragile object hidden away. And yet, deep down, something inside still longs to be seen. Because even the quietest minds still carry stories they wish someone would understand. This is the paradox of people who enjoy being alone. They are independent, but not heartless. They value solitude, but not permanent isolation. They simply crave a different kind of connection than the world usually offers. A slower connection. A deeper one. The problem is that modern society rarely creates space for this kind of interaction. Everything moves fast. Conversations skim the surface. Social energy is loud, performative, constantly demanding attention. And for someone who processes emotions deeply, this environment can feel overwhelming. So they retreat again into the place they know best, the inner world, but healing does not mean abandoning solitude. In fact, solitude can remain one of the greatest strengths a person has, because a mind that is comfortable alone is also a mind capable of deep reflection, creativity, and emotional clarity. The key is learning the difference between a refuge and a hiding place. A refuge restores you. A hiding place slowly disconnects you, and the shift between these two states often begins with something very small. Allowing safe connection to exist alongside solitude, not replacing your quiet nature, not forcing yourself into social environments that drain you, but allowing a few carefully chosen people to step gently into your world. People who respect silence, people who understand depth, people who do not rush your thoughts or dismiss your emotions. Because the truth is, solitude was never meant to replace connection. It was meant to help you understand yourself deeply enough to choose the right connections, the rare ones, the ones that feel calm instead of chaotic, the ones where conversation flows naturally instead of feeling forced. And sometimes those connections appear in the most unexpected ways. A quiet conversation with someone who thinks like you do. A moment where another person understands something you thought only existed in your mind. When that happens, something beautiful occurs. The invisible wall begins to soften. You realize that being alone never meant you were meant to stay alone forever. It simply meant your mind was waiting for something more meaningful than noise, more honest than small talk, more real than the shallow connections that fill most crowded rooms. And once you understand that, solitude transforms again. It no longer feels like separation from the world. It becomes a place where you return to recharge before stepping back into life with greater clarity. A quiet home for your thoughts, not a permanent escape from others. Because the people who learn to sit peacefully with their own minds often discover something extraordinary. They are capable of forming the deepest connections of all, not with many people, but with the right ones. The ones who see the quiet mind behind the silence, the ones who understand that sometimes the most thoughtful souls simply needed space before they could truly be known. So if you are someone who enjoys being alone, there is nothing wrong with you. Your mind simply moves differently. Your mind simply moves differently. It searches deeper. It listens more carefully. It values meaning over noise. And in a world that constantly rushes forward, that quiet depth is not a weakness. It is a rare kind of wisdom. The kind that grows slowly, in silence, where most people never think to look. And if these thoughts felt strangely familiar to you, if somewhere in this quiet reflection you recognized pieces of your own story, then perhaps you were never as alone as you thought, because there are many quiet minds in the world, all searching for the same kind of understanding. And sometimes those minds find each other in places like this. So if this reflection resonated with you and you want to explore more of these quiet truths about the human mind, stay close to this space, because the journey of understanding ourselves is long, but none of us truly walk it alone.